හරිම සුමුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 14th of November 2023. Possible. Treasury Secretary expresses confidence in achieving the revenue expectations outlined in Budget 2024. Bridging the gap. Tax expert calls on the government to strengthen mechanisms to decrease tax evasion and reduce the budget deficit. Priority. Terminating bankruptcy is my job, says the President. Sri Lanka Cricket. Ministerial subcommittee ordered to make decisions on the suspension of Sri Lanka Cricket's ICC membership.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and a warm welcome to you from AdaDerana's English News First at 9. This is Jonathan Benedict. Let's take a look at our top stories right now. As Budget 2024 places more emphasis on increased collection of government revenue through improved tax administration, Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardena says that the government is confident in achieving the revenue expectations next year. Delivering the keynote address at an expert panel discussion organised by the Centre for Banking Studies under the theme Decoding the National Budget 2024 Priorities Revealed, Siriwardena says that the Budget 2024 is mainly focused on the tax earnings imposed on corporate and personal income, value-added tax and taxes on alcohol, tobacco and fuel. He also said that VAT exemptions will help the estimated revenue target, while the Budget 2024 ensures a primary deficit of 0.8% of the GDP.
On the fiscal aspects, government tax revenue has grown by 50% in the first half of 2023 compared to the corresponding period in 2022. The country has achieved a primary surplus in the first half of 23, following a primary deficit of 5.7% of GDP in 2021. In 2022, the 52 large SOEs accounted for a collective loss of 722 billion in the first 8 months of 2022. But this has converted into a profit of 313 billion in the corresponding period of this year. Gross official reserves exceed 3.5 billion US dollars. The improved foreign exchange liquidity in the banking system have enabled the normalization of supply chains and basic consumption. We all are still in relatively early stages of a long and difficult road to a complete recovery. Nobody can claim that the stability is fully entrenched. There is no room for complacency and deviate from this reform path. The budget ensures a balance of revenue and expenditures to enable a primary surplus of 0.8% of GDP in 2024. Revenue growth is ensured by measures already introduced, and significant attention is paid to enhancing tax administration, compliance, and digitalization. Revenue growth in 2024 is ensured by measures already introduced and reforms to the VAT structure, in particular, amendments to VAT Act. The vast majority of VAT exemptions will be eliminated, and this will significantly add to revenue in 2024. The already announced increase in the VAT rate will also have a material revenue impact. At the same time, the elimination of import restrictions, except for passenger motor vehicles, will result in normalization of imports in 2024. This will also have a significant upside on border taxes, social security contribution levy from imports. With the recent changes, the tax structure is largely in place with a focus on corporate and personal income tax, VAT, and co-excises on alcohol, tobacco, and fuel. The government's focus now is on enhancing tax administration, compliance, and digitalization. We are confident that the combination of widening the VAT base, increase in VAT rate, removal of import restrictions, recovery of economic activity, and in particular tax administration efforts, the revenue required to support the 2024 budget will be met. This will enable us to meet the IMF's primary balance target of 0.8% of GDP and ensure the program remains on track. Sri Lanka has asked its external creditors to accept significant losses in their holdings of Sri Lankan debt. Creditors will be keeping a close eye on this budget to assess whether Sri Lanka is keeping on its commitments in establishing fiscal consolidation as the country's contribution towards achieving debt sustainability. Sri Lanka has already provided all groups of creditors with indicative restructuring scenarios that will enable the achievement of the debt reduction targets set by the IMF. That is, the reduction of debt to GDP ratio from 128% of GDP to less than 95% of GDP in 2032, reduction of gross financing needs from 34.6% of GDP in 22 to less than 13% of GDP on average during 27-32 period, restricting external debt service to GDP from 9.4% in 22 to less than 4.5% in 27-32 period. It is now up to the external creditors to come to an agreement with Sri Lankan authorities on a debt treatment that helps achieve these targets. China Exim Bank has already come to an understanding with Sri Lanka. The next step would be for the official creditor committee, co-chaired by Japan, India, and France, to provide a similar understanding. We are very hopeful that this will be materialized soon.
Staying on topic, the budget proposals for the 2024 year were unveiled by President Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday, outlining a revenue collection of an estimated 4.127 trillion rupees, of which 3.820 trillion rupees will be raised via taxes. The total government expenditure for the 2024 year is almost 7 trillion rupees. Consequently, tax experts are apprehensive of the government's ability to raise the expected revenue targets. Speaking to AdaDerana's English News, tax expert N.R. Gajendran is of the view that capturing and stemming money evasion measures via malpractice, such as malfeasance, misfeasance and non-feasance, will help the government earn an additional 1.5 trillion rupees, thereby reducing the budget deficit.
During Sri Lanka's engagement with the International Monetary Fund following the crisis last year, Sri Lanka's tax to gross domestic product ratios were highlighted as a major concern by the global lender. According to the World Bank, Sri Lanka's tax revenue in 2021 accounted only for 7.4% of the country's GDP, which is one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world. Through its Article 4 consultation report on Sri Lanka, the IMF pointed out that pre-pandemic tax cuts and the impact of COVID-19 led to fiscal deficits larger than 10% of GDP in 2020 and 2021 and a rapid increase in public debt to 119% of GDP in 2021. Taking this situation into account, the IMF highlighted the need for revenue-based fiscal consolidation to correct this imbalance in the country's economy. They urged the government to take measures to gradually increase the tax to GDP ratio to at least 14% by 2025. Further, the global lender urged the government to mobilize more revenue by raising the taxes of corporate income taxes, personal income taxes and VAT, minimizing exemptions, implementing base broadening measures and ensuring greater contributions from high-income earners. As a result, the government managed to estimate a 9% tax to GDP ratio through Budget 2023, expecting 2.596 trillion rupees to be raised via tax revenue. Out of that number, 864 billion rupees is expected to be collected as income tax, while 1.376 trillion rupees will be collected as tax on goods and services. According to the fiscal management report of the Ministry of Finance, between January and September 2023, the government collected 663.6 billion rupees as income tax and 690 billion rupees as taxes on goods and services during the first 9 months of this year. However, with the aim of getting closer to the targets proposed by the IMF, the government aims to raise a tax revenue of 3.820 trillion rupees next year, which is a 1.2 trillion rupee increase compared to the estimates of Budget 2023. This number accounts for 92.5% of the total 4.127 trillion rupee revenue estimated to be collected next year. Highest portion of tax revenue at 2.235 trillion rupees is expected to be raised via taxes on goods and services, including custom duties and VAT, while the second highest is expected through income tax at 1 trillion rupees.
On the revenue side, it is expected that we are going to raise 4.1 trillion rupees, when last year it was budgeted at 3.4 trillion and we might end up at 2.7 trillion. When you go into the expenditure side, it is alarming because the total expenditure currently this year is about 5.8 trillion. 2024, what is expected expenditure is about 7 trillion, which is Compared to the 2022, the expenditure to GDP was about 19.2%, and this time for 24 it's going to be about 22.2%. 3% increase in the expenditure to compare to the GDP. Sri Lanka is to raise about 7.3 trillion funding to meet this gap, whereas in 2023 we needed only 5 trillion. So this is about 50% more we need for debt financing. And the debt repayments in 2023 is about 2 trillion, and 2024 is going to be about 4.2 trillion. The question is highly debated: how can we raise revenue? Taxes have each crossed the highest rates we have reached, and it has crossed the Rubicon. And if the Laffer curve principle comes in any further tax rates increases, there would have been a drop in revenue, and that's the reason no revenue proposals of increasing taxes. Of course, the increases have come last week. If you see 35 years ago, Sri Lanka achieved tax to GDP about 20-22%. Now in 2022 we had about 8.8%. We are expecting this year about 11%, but we might end up with 9%. We are expecting about 13% in 2024, the GDP to tax to GDP ratio. Then where is this shortfall coming? Yes, this can come from evasion from SMEs, evasion from informal sector, and evasion from professional. But even if Sri Lanka captures those evasion, do we think that we will be able to bridge this revenue of about 5 to 10% additional revenue we require? If you see the real money which is being evaded is where there is malfeasance, misfeasance and non-feasance, and also there is palm greasing. If these things are captured, definitely we will raise revenue. And if you see our GDP is about 31.5 trillion, 10% is 3 trillion, and even if it is 5%, it's 1.5 trillion. We will be completely out of the woods if that is the case.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe reiterated his commitment to assuring the termination of bankruptcy and the revival of the country's economy as his main task. During a meeting with the heads of media organizations at the Presidential Secretariat this afternoon, President Wickremesinghe stressed that his goal is to ensure the success of the country's economic development program without the bane of political influence.
දාන චෝදනාව තමයි ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂය ඇතුලේ ඇතැම් മന്ത്രിවරුන්ගෙන් විපක්ෂය සහ සමීක්ෂණ කණ්ඩායම් වල ඔබතුමා ගිය වසර ඉදිරිපත් කරපු අයවැයේ 70%ක් ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙලා නැහැ. මේ අයවැයටත් ඒ යෝජනාවම ඉදිරිපත් වෙලා තියෙනවා.
ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂේ නම් ඒක නැහැ. අද මට හම්බුනේ නිසා මම ඇත්ත කියන්නම්කෝ. දැන් ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඕන මේක ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න පුළුවන්. විපක්ෂයේත් මට හම්බුණා UMP හිටපු අය ඒ අයත් කියන්නේ මේක බහැලා කරනවා කියලා. ඒ තියෙන්නේ ආර්ථික නග්ගන්න.
2024 වර්ෂයේ මුල් මාස 6 පිළිබඳව ඔබතුමාට පුරෝගතනයක් දෙන්න පුළුවන් ද රටේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා හැටියට?
පළවෙනි මාස කීපයත් අපිට දුෂ්කරේ වවෙන්ට යනවා. ඊට පස්සේ ටිකෙන් ටික මම කියන්නේ එක සැරේ නෙමෙයි මේ දියුණුවෙන්ට යනවා. 2018 අපේ දලදේශීය නිෂ්පාදනය ඇමරිකන් ඩොලර් බිලියන 94.5කට කිට්ටුයි. අපි 22 එක 77කට බැස්සා. මේ අවුරුද්දේ ඒක 85ක් විතරයි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි තාම 2018 තත්ත්වයට ඇවිල්ලා නැහැ. එන අවුරුද්දෙත් එන එකක් නැහැ. ඊට පස්සේ බලන්න එතෙන්ට එන්න. 2025 ඉඳන් තමයි අපේ ගමන ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම ආරම්භ කරන්න තියෙන්නේ. මේක ඒකට සූදානම් වීමක් පමණයි.
Many people expected, I think, more tax proposals in the budget, but it was not so. So how optimistic are you about the revenue projections of the government and financing the budget, especially with the salary increases? And
I think we had a 55% increase in revenue collection, and we are working on improving the revenue collection itself. Addition to the government, the Ways and Means Committee is also there, and they made some very useful suggestions which we want to look at. It will take about 3-4 years for the full this thing to come in, but we've just started on it. Once we bring the revenue authority, then we'll reorganize all the revenue agencies.
We're heading for a presidential election next year. What would be your future plans? Are you planning to recontest the presidency next year? And where your UNP is concerned, where do you see that going? Are you planning to re-strengthen your party and come back fresh next year? Or are you planning to make sure that the UNP joins with an alliance to contest? And what about you yourself? Are you going to recontest?
UNP wants to contest next time and they hope to win because they're only ones who spoke the truth and they had to go out of politics. I think that's going to be their strongest point and a lot of new faces. Well, there are other parties also in government and in the opposition who will contest. My first job is to ensure that we have terminated the bankruptcy. So once we have terminated the bankruptcy, we are introducing new plans. At that stage, we have to decide what is going to happen. But I come here to get all your support to terminate the bankruptcy.
And if you are successful in doing that, are you going to contest for the presidency yourself?
What do you think I should do? My job is to turn the economy around. We have come very close to it. And I've also introduced, which I want to do it without politics, a new economy. Let's debate on it, where we are going. Thereafter, let's see what we are doing.
The debate on the second reading of the 2024 budget, also known as the 2024 Appropriation Bill, kicked off in Parliament this morning. The budgetary proposals for the 2024 fiscal year were presented to the House by President Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, Economic Stabilisation and National Policies. The second reading of the 2024 budget will continue for 7 days until the 21st of November, excluding all Sundays.
වත්මන් රජයේ 2023 අයවැය වෙනුවෙන් ඉදිරිපත් කරනු ලැබූ යෝජනා අද වන විට ඉටු කර ඇති බවක් නම් පේන්නට නැහැ. 2023ට යෝජනා කරලා තිබුණා රුපියල් මිලියන 200ක් පළාත් සභා පාසල් 139ක ජාතික පාසල් 23ක සනීප ආරක්ෂක පහසුකම් ලබා දෙන්න. මොකද්ද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ? රජයේ ප්‍රොවිෂන් එකවත් දාලා නැහැ.
ලබන අඟහරුවාදා හරියට සත්‍යයකින් ඒ ප්‍රශ්න වලට උත්තර දෙන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව ගරු කතානායකතුමා මම පෙන්වලා දුන්නේ මේ හැමදේකම අවසාන ප්‍රතිඵලය තමයි ධනාත්මක සාර්ව ආර්ථිකය.
මෙතුමාගේ ගතියක් තියෙනවා මේ මම දැන් උත්තරයක් දෙන්නම්. නමුත් සවිස්තරාත්මකව ඉදිරියට ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නම් කියලා අර සවිස්තරාත්මක උත්තරය ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම මේකේ ඉන්නේ නැහැ. හරි? ඕක මේ අර සීනිපදු වංචාව ගැනත් මම අහනකොට එහෙම සිද්ධ වුණා. එහෙම කරන්න එපා.
ඊයේ පෙරේදා මොනවද කළේ? සීනිබද්ද. සත 25 ඉඳලා රුපියල් 50ට එකපාරින්ම ඉහළට ගෙනිච්චා. මම දන්නේ මොකද්ද හේතුව කියලා. ගජමිතුරු සමාගම් වලට එහෙම මොකක් හරි වාසියක් තිබුණාද දන්නේ නැහැ. ගිය පාර නම් තිබුණා. මේ පාරත් එහෙම එකක් තිබුණාද දන්නේ නැහැ.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe has authorized the ministerial subcommittee headed by Foreign Minister Ali Sabri to deal with the controversies shrouding Sri Lanka cricket to make decisions on the suspension of Sri Lanka cricket's membership within the International Cricket Council or ICC. Additionally, the Cabinet has decided that any future appointment of an interim committee must first receive Cabinet approval. On the 10th of November, the ICC suspended Sri Lanka cricket's membership with immediate effect on the grounds that Sri Lanka cricket is in serious breach of obligations as a member, in particular, the requirement to manage affairs autonomously and ensure that there is no government interference in the governance, regulation and administration of cricket in Sri Lanka. In its statement, the ICC said that the conditions of the suspension were decided by the ICC board in due course. The ICC board is scheduled to meet on the 21st of November, after which any future course of action is expected to be clearer. On the 6th of November, President Wickremesinghe appointed a 4-member committee chaired by Minister Ali Sabri, comprising of Ministers Tiran Alas, Manu Shananayakara and Kanchana Wijesekara to look into matters concerning SLC. After Sports Minister Roshan Ranasinghe appointed a 7-member interim committee for SLC, chaired by former World Cup winning Sri Lanka captain Arjuna Ranatunga. The interim committee, comprising of retired Supreme Court judges S.I. Imam and Rohini Marasinghe, retired High Court Judge Irangani Pereira, Upali Dharmadasa, Attorney-at-Law Rakita Rajapaksa and Hisham Jamaldeen to carry out the board's duties until further notice or until an election is held under the authority granted to him by the Sports Law No. 25 of 1973. However, it was later reported that President Ranil Wickremesinghe had not been notified of the Sports Minister's decision to appoint an interim committee, its composition or a decision to suspend the previous board. Subsequently, a cabinet subcommittee was appointed to look into the Sports Minister Roshan Ranasinghe's move to appoint an interim committee for Sri Lanka cricket. On the 7th of November, the Court of Appeals, however, issued a 14-day stay order preventing the 7-member interim committee appointed by the Sports Minister from functioning further. Meanwhile, a new judge bench of the Appeals Court has been appointed for the consideration of the motion filed by Minister Roshan Ranasinghe, challenging the stay order on the recently formed interim committee for Sri Lanka cricket. According to our court's correspondent, Justices D.N. Samarakun and Neil Idavela will sit for the consideration of the motion in future. The motion has been fixed for consideration again on Thursday, the 16th of November. Earlier today, Appeals Court President Justice Nisanka Badulla Karunaratne recused himself from legal proceedings in respect of the motion, citing criticisms levelled at him by the minister as well as other cabinet ministers and members of parliament. Appeals Court President's Counsel Justice Nisanka Badulla Karunaratne announced his decision when the motion was called this morning. Legal proceedings related to the motion were then handed over to the Justices Sobita Rajakaruna and Dhammika Ganepolla. However, Ganepolla too recused himself. Subsequently, a new judge bench comprising Justices D.N. Samarakun and Neil Iddavella were appointed to carry out legal proceedings pertaining to the motion. The motion was filed on Monday by the Sports Minister Roshan Ranasinghe, requesting the lifting of the stay order issued by the Appeal Court, preventing the functioning of the interim committee appointed by him for Sri Lanka cricket and the implementation of the relevant Gazette notification in this regard. In other news, the Supreme Court today ruled that former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, former Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa and several others are responsible for the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The country's highest court's judge bench determined that the former president, the former prime minister and the former finance minister, as well as former central bank governors Ajit Nivard Cabral and Professor W.D. Lakshman, former finance secretary S.R. Atigala, former presidential secretary P.B. Jayasundara and the monetary board members of the central bank have violated the fundamental rights of the people. The ruling was delivered based on the majority view of the five-judge bench presided over by Justice Jayanta Jayasuriya in respect of two fundamental rights petitions filed by the former head of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Chandra Jayaratne, and several others. The petitioners had sought an investigation into the state officials responsible for the economic crisis. Welcome back. The first round of virtual bilateral political consultations between Sweden and Sri Lanka took place on the 9th of November, ahead of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between both nations, which will be celebrated in 2024. The discussion focused on consolidating existing multifaceted partnerships and identifying new avenues for increased cooperation. The primary topics of discussion included expanding the bilateral economic partnerships and strengthening bilateral partnerships in ICT, science and technology, climate change and environment. Further, the two nations also exchanged views on cooperation at multi-level fora. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka indicated a keen interest in exploring the possibility of institutional collaboration and capacity building in R&D, ICT and the education sector. Further, the prospect of high-level visits from Sweden to commemorate the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations were also among the discussions. In its latest advancements, Sri Lankan Airlines has taken the initiative to introduce self-check-in and self-baggage drop services at the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katunayake in a bid to enhance the overall travel experience of passengers. Speaking in this regard, the Group Head of Information Technology of Sri Lankan Airlines, Chamara Pereira, assured the introduction of more technology in the future to provide passengers an efficient travel experience.
In a move to enhance the overall travel experience of passengers, Sri Lankan Airlines along with the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katunayake have taken the initiative to introduce self-check-in and self-bag drop services at the airport premises.
The challenge for all of us at airports is how we get passengers through the check-in process and to the aircraft as quickly as possible. And for many passengers, this is the most stressful part of the journey. And this is where self-check-in comes in. So what this does is it effectively gives us 8 more check-in counters. This is airports of the future, and this is the first step. And within this region, because of the challenges of visas, we're right ahead of the curve. Some of this technology is being used globally, particularly in domestic airports, but this is very new for international travel in the region. And so we look forward to building on this, making the experience of passengers who want to fly ever more seamless, ever faster, and ever more customer friendly.
The intention is to give the rich experience to our passengers who are passing through Colombo Airport to make their travel very easy, seamless, and going forward with touchless. So Sri Lankan Airlines is keen in giving almost all good experience in their travel channels. So most importantly, this is one of the critical touch points that every passenger is going through. So the intention is to transform their travel with the technology. So with the introduction of new self-service check-in and self-service backdrops, passengers can straight away come to the self-service kiosk. They can take their boarding pass and they can drop their bags at the baggage drops. So the passengers who are returning to their home base can easily come. The intention from Sri Lankan Airlines is to digitize and transform their travel throughout. This is just a first step in introducing self-service check-in and self-service backdrop. And in time to come, we are keen in introducing few more new technologies such as introduction of facial recognitions and biometrics so that the passengers can seamlessly pass the airport experience without much hassle.
The luxury passenger vessel Resilient Lady, operated by Virgin Voyages, flying the Bahamian flag, made its maiden call at the Port of Colombo yesterday. This is the second cruise ship that has made a call at the Port of Colombo this month so far. The ship, measuring 909 feet in length and accommodating 2,318 passengers and 1,194 crew members, called in at the East Terminal of the Port of Colombo. Built in 2022, Resilient Lady's maiden call was commemorated with a plaque exchange ceremony between Keith D. Bernard, chairman of the Sri Lanka Ports Authority, and Captain Matthew Hudson, the master of the vessel. Departing from Goa, India, the Resilient Lady's next port of call is Phuket, Thailand. Inchcape Mackinnon Mackenzie Shipping Limited serves as a local port agent for the vessel, while Aitken Spence Travel Limited serves as the local agent for excursions during her stay in Colombo. The Colombo Stock Exchange closed lower today following losses in consumer staples and financial stocks. The CSE All-Share Price Index settled down 1.13% at 10,775.43 points, while the S&P SL20 was down 1.51% at 3,040.56 points. Melster Corp and Senkadagala Finance were the top losers on the CSE All-Share Index, falling 6.92% and 11.69% respectively. Trading volume on the CSE All-Share Index rose to 37.1 million shares from 19.2 million shares in the previous session. Equity market turnover rose to 891.5 million rupees from 558.7 million rupees in the previous session. The capital goods sector was the top contributor to market turnover today, while the diversified financial sector was the second highest contributor. Foreign investors were net sellers, offloading stocks worth 118.6 million rupees, while domestic investors were net buyers, purchasing shares worth 844.8 million rupees. With that, let's take a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. Welcome back. Sri Lanka's Hemas Hospital celebrated its 15th anniversary recently. Let's take a look at that and more corporate news for the day today in our Corporate Affairs segment for the day.
Sri Lanka's Hemas Hospitals celebrated its 15th anniversary recently. Managing Director of Hemas Hospitals, Dr. Lakit Piris, says the goal of the hospital has always been to provide healthcare whilst enriching the communities in the country. During its 15-year journey, Hemas has been a pioneer in the healthcare industry, implementing electronic health records. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's Alpha Fire Services informs that Devaka Terence Ranil De Silva has resigned as an independent non-executive director from the board of directors of the company with effect from 9th of November 2023. It was further disclosed that De Silva does not have any relevant interest in shares issued by the company.
Former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom David Cameron has returned to politics in more than 7 years as a dramatic cabinet reshuffle paved the way of Cameron's entry into the heart of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's government. Accordingly, the former UK Prime Minister Cameron was appointed as the Foreign Secretary of the country today after the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was fired last morning.
Incumbent UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak carried out a dramatic cabinet reshuffle yesterday, firing his divisive Home Secretary and bringing back former Premier David Cameron to the heart of the government after a 7-year absence from politics. The hardline Home Secretary Suella Braverman was fired early this morning after making inflammatory comments about the policing of pro-Palestinian protests in central London over the weekend. Sunak then announced he was bringing Cameron back to frontline politics as Foreign Secretary in a stunning move that has few parallels in recent British political history. On Saturday, far-right counter-protesters clashed with police in central London after Braverman called the pro-Palestinian demonstration a hate march, stoking tensions around a rally taking place on Remembrance Sunday. Cameron returned to the cabinet table for the first time in more than 7 years today after his recall to government. Lord Cameron, as he is now known following his appointment to the House of Lords yesterday, had been out of Parliament since he stood down as Prime Minister in 2016, resigning after Britain voted to leave the European Union in a referendum that he had called.
That's all the news I have for you for today. I'm Jonathan Benedict. Have a good night and a blessed Wednesday ahead.